Hello, Santa Fe. I'm Carlene, and welcome to At the Roundhouse with Senator Peter Wirth. Thank you once again for showing up today.
Happy to be here on the other side.
On the other side, yeah. Well, this was a tough legislation.
Yeah, 30 days. Boy, it feels like 30 years.
It was.
It's amazing how much we get done in a very short period of time, but super exciting. I'll just say right up front, it's a very exciting time to serve. You know, when you're in these positions, we ask ourselves, and I certainly ask myself, why do I do what we're doing, especially with these late nights and going a million miles an hour like that. But when you can go through a session like this and the session we had last year and work with a governor like we have with Governor Lujan Grisham, this is why we do it. It's a very exciting time for New Mexico.
Well, I know it's hard, and I think you got a lot done this year with the governor.
We did. I mean, the thing, 30-day session in the Constitution is really budget matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so tax bills fit within that purview. And then constitutional amendments get started by a joint resolution process.
Mm-hmm.
And that can happen without a message from the governor. But then otherwise, it's messages from the governor, things that she wants to put on the agenda. And she was pretty careful about crafting them narrowly, although inevitably in this process there's some interpretation involved.
Absolutely.
And so bills all of a sudden come screaming in, and you're kind of wondering, well, where did that come from? Well, one or the other chamber ruled them germane. So we had a lot of bills at the end of the day.
Is she pretty easy to work with?
She's terrific. You know, it's such a kind of breath of fresh air to have a governor who really wants to govern.
Yes,
Seems
and
like
not afraid to.
That's right, not afraid to. And it seems like that shouldn't be out of the ordinary,
Mm-hmm.
but it just it's fun to work on policy issues with someone who is a policy wonk at the level of Governor Lujan Grisham. She loves it, and she understands it. You know, with her background in state government, and then of course local government and Washington.
Yeah.
I mean, she's done it at every level, and has relationships in this building that go back, many years. And so you take that policy nerdiness that lots of us have, mix that with a work ethic that's really extraordinary, and then something that's super important that I actually talked about at the kind of closing day press conference that doesn't get mentioned enough in this business, and that is the art of compromise. It's kind of become a bad word in politics.
What a concept.
There it is. That's another. What a governing and compromise.
Yeah.
But it just, again, working with the governor and her willingness to really push, but then also understand at the right moment you need to bring both sides together
Mm-hmm.
and compromise. And that's, I think, why we've had such an extraordinary list of accomplishments the last 2 years, the last two sessions.
That's right. I noticed this year that, I kind of kept up with all the bills and everything, but I noticed that she would push a little here, push a little there, and she'd go talk to different people, and pretty soon I noticed people kind of coming together. It didn't seem like there was so much dissension, even though there's dissension in the country, big time.
Yeah,
But it seemed like it was going pretty good here.
She really makes an effort to have an open door policy.
Mm-hmm.
And that means regardless of party, she's meeting constantly with legislators.
Yeah.
And that's again another thing that's new after 8 years, where it really was a very different approach with Governor Martinez.
I know.
And so just to have again a governor willing to sit down and listen, and then figure out ways to kind of modify and move and flex and get to the point of go. And the thing in this business, it may not be the perfect piece of legislation, but moving something forward, getting it on the books, taking that huge first step
Mm-hmm.
is a really important part of the process.
And it's a start. Let's see, this was 30 days. There's always a bunch of drama over here. I mean, everyone I didn't get to come over this year because you guys were so busy. I didn't get a chance to come over, but it seemed like there was a lot of drama, and you know, there were a lot of bills signed, there were a lot of bills vetoed, and so you had to keep your pen full of ink at all times. You know, it was busy.
It was really busy, and perhaps a little more drama than really needs to have in the building.
Yeah.
But one of the big differences between the two chambers is that, you know, here in the Senate, we really work hard to kind of work across the aisle collaboratively. Senator Engel, Stuart Engel, who's the minority leader, he and I have lots of communication and conversations and kind of understand the flow of the floor. And you know, he doesn't like getting surprised. He understands, certainly having been here since I think 1984, he understands how this place works. He can count votes with the best of them.
Yeah.
And so because of that relationship and the open door policy that we have with both sides, you know, things tend to work smoother in the Senate these days than in the House, where unfortunately it's just become an all-out battle where the Republicans have decided to debate everything for 2-3 hours, 3 hours being the limit. So even memorials were being debated for
That's
2
one
and
of the
3
things I
hours. And
noticed,
so, yeah, the Speaker of the House, I saw him last night, and he said at a certain point, about 3 days out, they realized that there was a list of bills they had to do, and so they actually put together a schedule which would have had them working straight through for the last 3 days, literally 24/7. 24/3 because there's 3 days left, but all 24 hours straight through, and they were assigning cots in the different parts of the building. And so, you know, that's the
Well, they figure that the longer it goes on, the more people are going to walk out. So
that's right. And then call all these procedural maneuvers and just really challenging. And the problem is it's hard to govern and pass good laws when you're just flat exhausted. And so we had some of that showing up. You know, I've done this long enough that I served 2 terms in the House, back with Speaker
I
Lujan.
remember when you did
And
that.
so it's interesting because back in the day we were very efficient and it ran smooth, and the Senate was complete chaos. And so now the 2 chambers have just kind of switched roles.
Yeah.
So,
Did you take anger management courses?
you know,
I've never
I'm-
seen you really get hot
well,
under the collar.
yeah, I've had a few moments, but it's one of the things about being a lawyer. I think that it is a skill set that, you know, you learn to deal with such a wide variety of people in all different stages of crisis and different, and so learning how to kind of stay up above it and not get sucked into the personal part of it is a really important kind of piece that I try and follow in how I run the chamber and deal with members. And you know, every day is another day. So
How are you dealing with the press? Has it been pretty good?
yeah, I think it's been good. It's been fun. We've got some new younger reporters
I know
now
you do,
that
yeah.
and it's been great to get to know them, and they've reached out, you know, wanting to meet kind of offline up front, have a cup of coffee before the session, which I think was a really good thing for both sides. And so that trust level is really an important part of how the legislative process works with the press. We did have a rather unfortunate incident with the press this session involving a television camera,
Television,
and
that was-
Rachel Knapp was a reporter for Channel 13, unfortunately was not only not allowed to film in the committee room, but was actually asked to leave the committee room, which again was an incorrect interpretation of our rules, but it also highlighted problems with our rules that we were able to fix.
Fix it up, yeah. I noticed that. I remember when that happened. In fact, I had an interview with Phil Casaus at the New Mexican, and we brought that up about how this woman was treated, and I was glad to see that they backed off a little bit, because that just gets fake news and the whole bit comes out, you know.
That's exactly right. Now, and to understand the context of it, and it came out of, I think, 2013 when Governor Martinez, decided that she was going to put cameras in all our committee rooms for gotcha moments.
I hate that.
So that was the, and so what happened is we had an older rule in the book that got modified. There still were actually signs in the committee rooms that said the rule didn't apply to the press, even though that's not what the rule said. So the whole thing, sometimes
Yeah.
it just, it takes an unfortunate situation to kind of work our way through it, use it as a learning process for everyone. And I think on the other side of it, we all come out better. And I think, and I appreciate the way the press also realized, okay, we're going to flag the issue. Yes, mistakes were made, but then once it got fixed, it kind of went away, which is how it should be.
And that's good, and I think most reporters are pretty good that way. That was my experience anyway, when I was working. I get crosswise once in a while with one of them, but it pays to get along because you can't fight the man that owns the ink.
It's exactly right. It's exactly right, and it's just, and those relationships are important,
Yeah.
and it's just getting our message out, and then obviously kind of the reporting that was fun this session is some of the newer journalists actually took a step further than the typical, okay, this is what's happening with the bill. There was a really terrific story by Jens Gould, who's with the New Mexican,
Right.
talking about all of the FIRs, the financial reports that are prepared on each bill, and the war room that exists at the Legislative Finance Committee where those reports are done. And it's way in the weeds, but it's something that was super important because it really, those analysis can change the path of legislation.
Yeah.
And so to kind of highlight that the way he did, I thought was a super good story.
And it shows the public how much is involved. I mean, I hear this all the time. Oh, politicians are nothing but a bunch of crooks, I asked Casals about that, and I said, people believe that. They believe it. And a lot of times it's just misunderstanding between a reporter and a legislator or a state agency or whatever the case might be. Because not everybody's crooked, So I think you handle yourself quite well. I'm impressed.
Well, it's a good, it's an incredible honor to serve. That's the thing,
Oh.
and it's one of the things that, as you get ready for these sessions, we have a number of us really make an effort to go out and visit with constituents and different groups, and I think the whole delegation was at a League of Women Voters lunch, and it's just one of those moments when you stop, and it's easy to focus on, oh yeah, this is a lot of work, oh this is frustrating, this and this, but then at the end of the day, to have a chance to be, the voice for 50,000 people here in Santa Fe
Bet.
is a really cool thing, and so it just reaffirms my whole belief in the democratic process.
The process is good.
The process is good.
And
so
the Constitution is good. We start messing with it, we're in trouble.
We're in big trouble.
Okay, medical marijuana. Now that, to out-of-state residents, I guess is what one of the bills was. And then you had importing drugs from Canada. That's a good idea.
It's a great idea. Senator Papin carried that bill. We actually, leadership office gets some of the low bill numbers, and we decided that was a big enough deal that it should be Senate Bill 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so Senator Papin worked with the governor and her team on that, and it's something that, again, makes so much sense. It seems somewhat crazy that we have this crazy checkerboard of pricing for pharmaceuticals, but it's true. And so and especially here in New Mexico, lots of people go down to Mexico to
I
get
know people that
That's
go
right.
down there. I brought it back for people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I mean, the fact is that it's worth exploring to see if it can benefit the state, and so that's what that bill did, and that passed, and one of the early bills that passed. The bill also passed on medical cannabis, and that's an interesting one because it was not intended. So last year there was a change to the statute on the medical cannabis program, and certain wording was changed, and Senator Ortiz-Pino was the sponsor.
Right. Yes.
And he said he never intended to change it so that anyone could come from out of state and qualify to get a New Mexico card. And yet, he may not have intended it, but the words that were used in the change of the statute said exactly that. Went to court, the court ruled that, in fact, the statute was not ambiguous. It was very clear and allowed exactly what was happening to happen. So we came in and fixed it.
Yeah, well, that was, I'm glad that got into it. You know, some of these things that came in under the health bills, it's like we're reinventing ourselves here. They have discrimination, employment discrimination on pregnancy. Well, I thought we'd taken care of that years ago.
Well, it's just elevating those protection levels into the
Good.
Human Rights Act and basically elevating the pregnancy status as a protected class. And so what was exciting about that is that's a bill that's been around for a number of years.
Always.
It's been around, and we actually tried to do this. The Senate passed this my first year as the majority leader in 2017. It didn't get through the other chamber. And then last year the other chamber passed it, but didn't get through the Senate. This year it was really exciting to see, you know, the way the process should work. All of the folks that had been concerned about it sat down around a table, got together, and it became a consensus bill.
that was one that kind of threw me. And then the abortion issue came up again.
Yeah, a little bit, although we didn't have.
Not as bad as it could have been.
We did not have any bills in the Senate. I know there were some parental notification and some bills introduced in the House. The big issue when it comes to abortion is the statute on the books from 1969 that criminalizes abortion. Yeah. And I saw the Supreme Court is again taking up these cases that chip away at Roe versus Wade. And so that was a bill that did not pass in 2019. It failed in the Senate. We had a number of conservative Democrats who feel strongly about that issue, and I think there was some misunderstanding about exactly what it did. But that bill did not come back. It's a priority of the governor. It's a priority of the House. It's certainly a priority of mine. Yeah. But you also got to understand where your votes are. And so that's an issue we need to fix, because otherwise, if Roe versus Wade were to be overturned by the Supreme Court,
they're trying.
We'd have it be a felony for a doctor and a woman to, have an abortion or perform an abortion.
Just go down to Wattis like they used to do.
Just a very outdated old law that needs to be corrected.
Okay, the regulations on tobacco, another one. Vaping, and now we've got all kinds of things like that. What kind of regulations on tobacco?
Yeah, so basically an age requirement being built in. Federal laws changed on this, but also with the vaping issue kind of becoming so predominant and the use among teenagers, very scary. So really tightening all those laws up, and that's again was a bill Senator Lopez worked on with Senator Ramos and the Department of Health and the governor, and so that one did get across the finish line, which is an important thing, very, very important public health issue.
Okay, so you got $7.6 billion in authorization money for the fiscal year, right?
We did. It's the largest budget state's ever had.
Is that because of all the dinero down in?
Well, it's oil and gas.
Basin?
Oil and gas. A lot of it comes from oil and gas, and we've been on this roller coaster. The ups and the downs of oil and gas. Just 3 years ago, when I first became majority leader in 2017, so it's not that long ago, we were at the end of a 10-year just horrific downturn cycle, and came into session with a $69 million shortfall in the current budget year and a $350 million shortfall in the upcoming year, and we had, a heck of a time. Vetoes, court challenges, special sessions, and to go from that to where we are today, which is just a wild swing on the upslope of the roller coaster, has been a really good thing for lots of programs and backfilling of cuts that we had to make, but it's also something we need to be very cautious about.
Solar energy, there's a lot going on with that.
There's no question diversification is important,
Yeah.
and I think what's on the energy front, while we do have this big reliance on oil and gas, it's also been very interesting to see how our investor-owned utilities are shifting away from coal. Basically because the cost of renewables has gone down so dramatically. And that the Energy Transition Act, which passed in 2019, sets a renewable portfolio standard target of 100% clean energy by 2045, which is really extraordinary, how fast that's happened. And the fact that utilities were willing to be part of that is an acknowledgement of that.
Are we one of the better states on promoting solar energy?
We're getting there.
It seems like it's being accepted now. There are going to be a few things you're going to have problems with.
Yeah, the big one that we didn't get through this session that there was a discussion about failed on the House floor was community solar. And that's
Yes.
pretty kind of a concept where you have a smaller, we like to think of it as a solar garden, so a smaller array that people can subscribe to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a novel concept. Colorado's done it for years. Senator Bingaman, it was very fun when I first became chair of the Senate Conservation Committee in 2013. Senator Bingaman had just retired from the U.S. Senate, and it was really, he came and testified here at the state legislature and talked about community solar as one of the things that was very bipartisan that we should do.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not there yet. It's hard because of the investor-owned utilities get very concerned that these small solar arrays compete against them or generate their own retail wheeling is what it's called, generating their own power. And so we've had that tension, but I think that's going to happen. It's just a question of getting it right.
Working families, tax credits.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good.
It's a good one. Now that passed in the House, but we didn't do that in the Senate. I think we had a big tax package in 2019, and then this year, a number of things. The tax on Social Security certainly has got a lot of people's attention.
Yes.
There was numerous bills to address that. Those didn't pass, not because we don't understand that's something that needs to get fixed. It's just that it needs to be considered in the whole context of the tax landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so the governor is going to put together a commission of experts to work on tax policy during the interim.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to figure out how to do that and pay for it, but not put us in a position where we're doing what we did 10 plus years ago when I was first in the legislature, which is every year come in and pass all these new tax exemptions and deductions, which of course are paid for with this oil and gas money. And then when the oil and gas money goes away, you've taken away, the revenue base to run government. So we'll look at those for sure next year.
How much hassle are you getting on fracking? Chaco Canyon, it has to be 10 miles
Mhm.
away. They want to bring it closer. Even down in Hobbs, USA,
Mhm.
fracking. Farmers are not going to go for that. Ranchers aren't either. And there's a lot of oil down there.
A lot of oil, and the technology has changed the game in a way that the production today looks completely different than it did 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, how do we, as we move forward in our transition, because we are in a transition, there is no question. Climate change is here, it's real,
It is.
and we need to be pushing on all fronts. What's challenging about oil and gas is it's a checkerboard. Lots of it's on federal land,
Mhm.
and so obviously the state doesn't have jurisdiction there. Lots of it's on private land. There's some that certainly is on state land. And so the question becomes, as we move forward, kind of key things for me are making absolutely sure that we are doing everything we can in terms of the regulatory environment, giving the regulators the tools they need to make sure that the emissions are being limited to the extent possible. There's a methane rule that Governor Lujan Grisham's working on right now that's going to be very important. And then an issue that's really, I think, critical, that never gets as much play until we don't have it, is water.
Oh,
And boy, the amount of
absolutely.
fresh water being used in this hydraulic fracturing is really a scary thing. And so farmers are selling water rights for oil and gas.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the produced water, there was a produced water bill in 2019, having the produced water available as an alternative to fresh water is a very important step in the right direction.
And one of the things I've been kind of keeping up with is endangered species. And of course this all works together, you know. I mean, it's not like you think about one thing and think about another thing, that they're different, because they all come together. The Endangered Species Act, the administration's proposing to do away with that. The Environmental Protection Agency, all this stuff. And for New Mexico, that would be criminal. I mean, we've got to keep some of this beautiful land we've got and some of the wonderful treasures that we have in this state.
We do. We have an amazing state, and you are right. It's incredibly important that we do maintain the regulatory oversight, and to the extent the federal government is pulling back in certain areas, that's where the state can step in. And you're going to see some of that, and that's one of the important things to me when you have this resource as we go through this transition, is making sure that at the end of this we're not left with complete and utter destruction. And in a climate change environment, it's a scary time.
It's very scary.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into education, another hot topic in this state. We are having a lot of problems with education. Now, they've agreed to give the teachers a raise. They need a raise.
They do. Yeah, so they've got between,
What was
You
it,
know,
4%?
in the last 14 months, between this year and last year, it's over 10%.
Okay.
And so that is a very good thing, because I agree wholeheartedly that our teachers are heroes, and what they do in the classroom is absolutely critical to everything in our state. I mean, education really is the #1 economic development tool we could have. And if we don't have a good education system, the idea that we're going to bring companies here when they can't get workers is just not going to happen.
Because we don't really have a lot of them. So now I think part of that bill was to get substitute teachers to be able to fill in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
And
that,
you know, you have a lot of people that are retired now that would love to do something like that.
it's true. And this whole return to work has been a really challenging issue that I've lived it since Governor Richardson spearheaded kind of ending the double dipping. There were some outrageous examples of, people basically getting a $150,000 retirement and then they're back at work and making, $125,000 at a different.
That was terrible.
And so that's the extreme, but I think the teacher situation is one where, through some technicalities, people couldn't come back and substitute without impacting their retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kind of things that do need to get tweaked, and we've been doing that. With respect to education, you talked about the $7.6 billion budget. So what's been exciting is in the last 2 sessions, 2019 we called it the moonshot, education moonshot. It was about $500 million of new money for public education. This year there were another couple $100 million, so up to about $700 million in new money. And then one of the big initiatives of the governor was an early childhood permanent fund.
Yeah.
We took $320 million of this oil and gas money, and rather than fund it for programs, recurring programs, we started this permanent fund for early childhood education. And so,
Bilingual?
certainly
Bilingual
bilingual is part of the whole funding formula, and the bilingual piece is something that definitely needs to be focused on. At-risk factor in the funding formula this year got a $50 million increase. That's really important to get the dollars out to the kids that need it the most, the most economically disadvantaged kids. There's a big lawsuit, Yazzie Martinez, that is pending and a kind of a ticking time bomb, and so, we're going to be back in court, and I'm sure there's going to be arguments on both sides as to whether we've fulfilled our duty to sufficiently fund education. I think we certainly have made a huge dent and moved forward in a really positive direction.
That's good, because it's, our education system, I think we're a little bit over Mississippi now, or maybe we're under Mississippi, I'm not sure where.
Yeah, we've got lots of work to do, for sure.
Okay, the other big one, and I found that to be kind of interesting, you said people can bring in their guns, which I thought was a smart move, and the governor managed to get that red flag legislation through with all of your help.
Yeah, it was a very narrow window in the Senate. The bill passed 22-20, and I mentioned Senator Engel earlier. He and I, on some of these close votes, will talk to each other on the phone on the floor, and it was one where neither one of us were exactly sure where the votes were going to be.
Mm-hmm.
We felt confident. I felt confident if we had the votes to put it on the floor. But it's unfortunate it's become such a hot button issue.
It's terrible. You
Yeah.
even had the sheriffs working against you. Some areas,
We did. There also were sheriffs that were supportive. The thing that people forget so quickly is that it's not a partisan issue. Florida, with a Republican legislature and a Republican governor after the Parkland shooting,
Mm-hmm.
they passed a version of this. President Trump has said he supports some version of this. And so what we did was take, some of our top-notch legislator lawyers, Senator Cervantes, who I went to law school many, many years ago, and we've been friends ever since, and we really focused on due process and making sure that the bill would withstand constitutional scrutiny.
Yeah.
And I think that's what got it over the finish line.
Well, I think the bill itself was, it's not taking away people's guns. I believe in people should have guns if
Sure.
they want them. But
When people
if somebody's threatening, and there's so much domestic violence in this town and in this state, if some dude's beating up his wife and or his girlfriend and has a gun, it needs to be taken away until he can behave himself.
Yeah,
and
it's
maybe her too.
it's another tool. That's
Yes.
the way to look at it. It's another tool that's available to law enforcement. And what was really important is it's not the law that passed and has been signed by the governor doesn't allow anyone to just go racing to the court. You've got to go through law enforcement. So that's an important check. And then law enforcement actually goes to the court to push it through.
I want to ask a question. This human trafficking got turned down. I remember when Senator Garcia was here,
Mm-hmm.
she was really working on that.
With Gary King, if I remember
Yes.
right. Yep.
And how come nobody has stepped into her position there to have the nerve to stop that sex trafficking? Hell, we had some guy out there in Lamy,
Mm-hmm.
the Galisteo Basin, with young women.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
just, it's not right.
I completely agree, and the challenge with lots of these different penalty bills we did have as part of the governor's public safety package this session. There were some new penalty enhancement, but there's a fundamental kind of ideological question about penalties and deterrence, and does increasing incarceration result in deterrence
Mhm.
on the front end, and that whole question that we struggle with. That particular bill, again, I think came in relatively late over to our side. It was a 30-day session, so that's part of the challenge.
Yeah,
Is that
it was short.
it was short, and I don't think we even heard that bill in Senate Judiciary. Probably because there were some things flagged about it, and it just never made it through the process. But the governor's crime package did move through, and that included some important steps on that end. We've made a huge transition in the legislature to focusing on real public safety reform and criminal justice reform,
Mhm.
where let's get those that are dangerous, the really bad actors need to be locked up and put away. But then there's so many people on the other side that get sucked into the system due to drugs, alcohol.
Yeah.
They need to get into treatment. And again, that distinction is something that has bipartisan support, and for many years they've been closing prisons in Texas, and yet in New Mexico we just wanted to lock everybody up. Well, now I think you're seeing that balanced approach, which is really important.
Are our prisons too full?
So we've got a huge challenge in New Mexico with private prisons, but I think as a result of some of the criminal justice reforms that were passed just this last session, you're starting to see prison populations come down a little bit. But almost half our prisons are private prisons, and that creates all kinds of challenging policy questions because we have a contract that requires us to keep those slots filled. And if they're not being filled, we're writing a check for empty slots. And at some point, we've got to, seems to me, transition to incarceration being a fundamental kind of public government function.
Yeah.
I just am not a big fan of the private prison system.
Well, there was a great article in the Journal and the New Mexican about the old prison riot they had when Governor King was in power. And I mean, it was a slaughter out there. And somebody told me, they said, we're getting ready for another one. They said it's too overcrowded out there. These are people that supposedly know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and I've served on the Courts Corrections Oversight Committee, the interim committee, for many, many years. And there's no question that the prison system is very challenging. And so how you do it, what kind of resources you put inside the facility to get people to training, because the idea that you're just going to lock people up and they're not going to come out is not the way it works. They're coming out. So if you don't invest in a skill set in the treatment so that when they come out they've got some place to go, it really can be a huge, huge issue.
What about this ethics commission? How do you feel about that? Is it make you a little nervous, or?
No, I think it's a good
Is
thing.
it-
I fought
is it a good
really
thing?
hard. I mean, it's been around. The concept has been around kind of the whole time I've been. I think Governor Richardson first had a task force that suggested it, and when I was first in the Senate in 2009 or 2010, we actually got a bill to the Senate floor. In 2017, we finally got something passed that was a constitutional amendment that let the voters decide, and the voters overwhelmingly said, we want to do this. And so it exists. We funded it this year. It's got the appointments were made. Governor Carruthers.
How do they pick people for that?
So it's we passed a statute in 2019 that lays out the appointment process, and so both minority and majority in the legislature get different appointments, and it's a balanced approach, and I think they've done a good job of putting together a cross-section of commissioners. Bill Lang, who's a retired judge from Albuquerque, is the chair, was appointed by the governor. And so we'll see, again, it's a new I read they just got their first complaint.
They did.
So that took a while. Probably
Yeah.
a good sign. It wasn't like they were just deluged with complaints. But again, it can be both a sword and a shield. I mean, I think the thing that people forget is that one of the purposes of the Ethics Commission is to educate, us when there's issues that arise. I know as a lawyer, I can go to the state bar with an ethical issue on the front end and get an opinion on what direction to go. Now we've got a similar venue where if you're facing a challenge as a legislator, you can go to the Ethics Commission and get direction on which way to go before you just make the decision yourself and potentially make the wrong decision.
When you have one of your legislative people drunk driving or whatever, what do you think they should do if they're found guilty? Do you think they should step down?
Well, I think it's up to each legislator and the constituents that elected them. Again, I think that, each situation is different.
I know, and it can happen. It can happen to
That's
anybody.
right, and it's happened, certainly, and there's been different situations. I mean, it's a very serious thing for any of us in society to be drinking and driving is just wrong. And so the question of how the legislator handles that, and ultimately it's up to the constituents as to what direction they want to go, because again, typical DWI is not a felony. So if it was a felony conviction, then you're out, but as a misdemeanor, it's not. But I think it's certainly something we need to keep talking about, and obviously there's just no place for drinking and driving on our roads.
Do they ever provide the legislators with a course in ethical behavior? I mean, there are things that you can talk about, you know, and it might help, like a new senator coming in, and I know there's drinking everywhere.
Well, we do. So here's the thing. So
Yeah.
here's the good news, Carly. Let me say the good news is the last couple of years we now have mandatory ethics training is a requirement.
Okay.
And so before every session, we come in and we have a outside person come in and give us specific ethics training. That's a new thing, but a very important thing. So that's happened, and that's also the result of kind of the whole Me Too movement and sexual harassment, and we've got a much tighter sexual harassment policy here at the legislature.
They have a tighter one.
Yeah, so those are things we just need to keep working on, and I'm all in favor of that.
Yeah. One of the things that had everybody outraged was the state PERA. You know, I have a great deal of respect for Wayne Probst. I don't know how much you know of him.
I went to law school with him. He's a classmate.
Yeah, but I'm impressed with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I see where that was solved. I think that was a good way of doing what they did. And you know, there's still people complaining, but it's something had to be done.
I agree with you. I voted for it. I've got a lot of retired state employees in the district I represent, but also lots of current state employees. And it was one of those kind of shared sacrifice things that if we didn't do it, and everything went off the cliff like it did after we did the 2013 reform, then you could really be in a situation where people are not just looking at tweaks to their cost of living adjustment, but are actually looking at only getting a percentage of their retirement. And that's what's happened in other states. In Kentucky, the retirement system is just completely imploded. So we were working very hard to prevent that from happening. Tough votes.
Well, I'm glad something was done about it, because
Yeah.
it was important to a lot of retirees. I have one more thing I want to talk to you about, real short. They were supposed to be here, but I guess they changed their mind. This coronavirus that's going on in the country now. When I left the house, they had pretty well declared it a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It's really spreading fast, I guess. Testing kits. I know we have them here in this state. We have to, if you think you have something, you have to go to the doctor, and then they give you the test, and then it goes to Albuquerque, and then it comes back and goes to CDC.
Mm-hmm.
That's the process.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to pay for that? I mean, some poor schmuck gets coronavirus, and they got to get a test for $3,000 or whatever the price is going to be. How much influence are you going to have over the health department?
Well, so there's actually a briefing going on right as we speak.
Maybe that's why they didn't show up.
With the health secretary. That's going on right now.
Okay.
on New Mexico's response. I know at the federal level, in the House, the Democrats are going to go push through a huge package to pay for the costs of the testing piece. But the other piece that really is concerning is that, you know, for those that get the coronavirus, the medical expense is just stunning. At extreme levels, for critical cases, it requires incubators and being able to intubate someone.
Intubate.
And those machines I was hearing are, you know, the price of a car. So we don't have enough of those. I mean, there's just, the whole system is going to be taxed in a way that we've just not seen before. So that at the end of the day, you're spot on. I mean, how do you pay for that in a state like ours, where we have so many people that are already dependent on Medicaid for their coverage?
That's
So
right.
need to be proactive, though, and I know Governor Lujan Grisham is on this.
Good.
And so it's something that we've all got to watch.
they just had Governor Cuomo on. I happened to watch it as I was leaving the house, and
Mm-hmm.
he's going strictly state, not working with the federal, working with the state people. So it's getting pretty serious over there, and that's scary.
Very scary. So we got to watch. I think this is one that seems to be moving as fast as we pick every night. When you look at the news, things have just expanded dramatically. So, and then I think what's going to happen is it's going to amp down during the warmer months, and then what's the concern is that when it gets cold again in the fall, it could come back. So we're just going to need to really be proactive here, moving forward.
Well, one thing, can you say one thing to the people here in Santa Fe and New Mexico about how they should be with this virus? Calm and listen to the experts.
Yeah, no, I think you need to be
And
calm. You
science.
need to listen for sure, and you just need to be proactive, which doesn't mean being scared to the point of being unwilling to ever leave your house, but it does mean, lots and lots of hand washing. That's kind of rule number one. And then I just think being aware of the circumstances and what's happening and how it's gonna be here. But I think it's something we're all gonna have to change the way we've been doing things because it's here. But it doesn't mean that we can't move forward. We have to continue to move forward, but it'll be different.
And to contain it.
Absolutely. Once you're sick, don't go to work when you're sick. We're all, if you want to be a hero and you want to plug through, well, then you're going to go get everyone else sick. So
Yeah, that's
another
right.
key thing.
Okay, Senator, thank you so much.
Absolutely, always a pleasure.
I'd shake hands with you, but I don't want to give you.
This is the new shake right there.
There you go. Okay, thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on the show.
Absolutely.